Welcome to the Brain Health Hookup. I'm Laurel Myers Hurst, your resident groovologist, and I believe that better mental health needs to be fun. Here we talk about mental wellness, we explore the physical, emotional, and relational needs we have as humans with the science and practices that help our mental health to flourish. Plus, we dive into my signature method, groove therapy, that engages folks in groove-based music making to lift mood and lower inflammation and pain. I'm so glad you're here. So let's hit it.
Well.
Now that's a deep subject.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Jodie, for being my guest today. For my regular podcast audience, my guest today is Jodie Skillicorn, my colleague and collaborating psychiatrist in my psychiatric practice. Jodie is an author and a very active clinician. She works with patients in several integrative modalities to bring true healing, to focus constantly on remission and progress toward remission. And I've just been so glad to be welcomed into her solar system as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So welcome, Dr. Skillicorn.
Thanks for having me.
Jodie, you've been talking with me over the last few months as my book was getting ready to publish. I've been so excited by your enthusiasm and your encouragement to do this thing, to get the work out. And since I have the book in my hot little hands today, I'm so excited about how it looks and color illustrations throughout. A tidy little book, not too hard of a read, but I'm just going to take from my book, my chapter on belonging, a little quote, because we'll be addressing belonging today. This quote from page 73 says, "In a population of elementary age foster youth in Japan, groove-based drumming was shown to increase oxytocin levels. Drumming, even drum free play, reduced anxiety and increased attention. But organized drumming led to greater benefits in both boys and girls. Remarkably, boys received twice the oxytocin boost from organized drumming compared to girls. More rigorous research is needed to determine whether oxytocin might become a treatment for anxiety or inattentiveness, but the current state of science recommends that the social support experienced in drumming groups is related to boosts in oxytocin gained from drumming together." And we're going to talk today about how belonging has been important in your patient's experience, how you've drawn on making connections and belonging to help people toward remission, and what you feel about the future for mental health care is, as even our Surgeon General of the United States has been saying that a lack of connection has been the main driver of mental illness in our country. So take it away. Any and all of those topics are on the menu for today, and we'll hit them all.
Okay. Well, I guess I just want to address that quote you read because it's so interesting, right? But I think it points to, right, just this fundamental evolutionary need to belong, right? Because evolutionarily, to not belong it meant death. To be banished from the tribe, from the group, it was death. So we're wired to fundamentally feel anxious, afraid, and go into that fight, flight, freeze because it still feels like, even though it's not actually the case anymore, a fundamental threat to our survival, right? And so it makes sense that those groups are having that kind of power. And it's interesting. That's so interesting about the difference between the girls and the boys. But I feel like girls and women are more apt to kind of, right, we have that communication. We're more apt to, when we're stressed, to reach out to others. And boys just societally are not, and men. And so I think it's really interesting that the boost is even greater for them, maybe. Anyway, I don't know why that's the case. It's just interesting.
Yeah, maybe girls are organizing themselves socially, even in free play, in ways that boys don't do without the direction of the group. I am curious about the same thing.
Yeah. But along those same lines of oxytocin, I mean, when I'm working with patients, I mean, one of the most simple, basic ways to release oxytocin is actually just to I'm always having people just rubbing their own chest, their own hearts, right? When they're distressed, when they're upset, when they're feeling alone or not belonging, to offer ourselves that belonging. And actually, when we do that, when we just rub our heart, we actually increase oxytocin as well. So such a simple, easy way to do that on our own. Probably not to the same degree as when we're in a group and we have music and everything else going on, but it is a really simple, easy way to help regulate and to kind of make us to come back home to ourselves, our fundamental belonging.
I love that simple practice. And there are some universal signals that involve our hands. I think it's generally understood if anyone has their hands like this, that it's a sense of comfort. Of course, the universal sign for choking, but you might have noticed also that the universal sign for intolerable distress seems to be this, right? That when we see somebody like that, but interesting that we can have a guiding movement neurologically, biologically, that brings us comfort.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about the lack or the uptake in connection and belonging and what the downstream effects you see of that for mental health.
I mean, I think we're seeing that in everyone, aren't we? I mean, just societally, I think even just when you look at it politically, because it's hard not to mention that. But right, I mean, but all that polarization, that division, we're living in our little tiny silos on the social media. We're being spread messages of division and separation, and our nervous systems react to that. And then we feel alone. But I think when we're actually out in the world, it's not the truth, right? It's more of a story than a reality. And it's a story we're being sort of sold on in media and social media. And I think it's important to realize that sort of loneliness, when we talk about the spike in loneliness, right? It's loneliness is a perception. So we can be around all kinds of people, even people we care about, and feel lonely, especially if we're not, again, kind of coming home to ourselves. If we feel disconnected from our own bodies, our own hearts, right? It's hard to connect with others. Or if we're caught up in all the fear and our nervous system is reactive, right? That part, we lose that ability to connect with others, and we start to see the world more threatening. So just a neutral expression. I could be looking at you right now, and if I were in that state, right, your facial expression, even though it's completely neutral and kind right now, would look threatening to me, right? And what I hear would seem more threatening, and what's going on around me seems more threatening. And so the way to come back is to start to find our own home within. So we can have a sense of belonging with us wherever we are, even when we feel alone. We can kind of come back to ourselves and our own heart and our own comfort. And I think even going beyond that, right, the truth is, right, we're intricately connected with everyone, whether we want to be or not, and around with the nature around us, right? Each breath in, we're in this reciprocal relationship with the flora around us. We're breathing in the oxygen, we're sending it back out. We're in this constant communication with the world. We just have kind of got so lost in our heads and our stories and fear that we've lost connection with those truths. But those are the truths.
Those stories and fears we often call clinically narratives that patients construct based on their experiences. And those experiences lead to ways of protecting, obviously, that we hold on to. When those stories become really intrusive in our everyday thinking, like constant ruminating, you already mentioned this simple oxytocin releasing practice. Are there any ways with our thoughts or our behaviors that you go to break those ruminations on narratives?
I think sometimes, so we want to get out of our head and into our body. So we could do it all kinds of ways. Exercising does that. Being outside in nature does that. Just planting your feet on the ground does that. Talking with others does that. Supportive others. Also the breath, right? So the breath is direct communication with that part of the nervous system, that fight, flight, freeze part of the nervous system. And so if we start to breathe into the belly, we start to send a signal that we're safe. And once we send that signal, then we can start to reconnect with ourselves and with others. So that's probably the easiest way. There's sometimes I have people get up and just shake to kind of release, just like in the National Geographic videos, right? You see the gazelle escape from the tiger. And the first thing the gazelle does is just quiver and shake and release all those stress hormones. And then they can just go back to being present. But ultimately, I guess what all that has in common is it's to be present, right? Rumination is we're usually in the future, or we're, regretting something from the past. But in the present moment, we can come back. We can center ourselves in the present moment.
This is a perfect segue for my next question, because you revised something you said. You said in the presence or communication with others, and then you said supportive others, right? You amended your verbiage. And I'm curious if you have any words of wisdom. This is holiday time for most people in North America. We're celebrating national holiday and various religious holidays through the end of the year. Sometimes those holiday times come with exposures we wouldn't choose at other times to people who are in our social network, in our family, who continue those messages of not belonging or of danger. Do you have any advice for people who are going into the holidays and they know that those narratives are going to be refreshed with more evidence?
Well, I think that's when we really need to use those skills more than ever, right? Well, one, if it's actually dangerous, then we need to set really strict boundaries, right? Not show up. It's always a choice. Setting in advance the option to leave if someone is actually toxic to us. So, right, setting firm boundaries. But again, it's also recognizing that it's not about us, right? It's their stuff. And it doesn't mean we have to take it or accept it or, right, allow it. But it does mean we don't have to take on their story about us as truth. And to recognize, again, that's their own projection based on their own fears, their own worries, their own self-doubts, their own low worth. And so our work always, and I think families are perfect for this, they are our greatest teachers, is right, to recognize that that's where our stories have come from, most of them, a lot of them. And it's our opportunity to kind of catch them and to ground ourselves with the breath and with simple techniques like this. This is easy to do at the dinner table. And to just kind
Somebody's going to think you're indigestion.
Yeah. Or just breathing into the belly so no one has to know anything. Yeah, but just protecting ourselves in that way and grounding ourselves and coming back into our heart rather than in our head.
Considering that our families are often major source of belonging, feelings of belongings or perceptions of belonging, how do you recommend we recognize things as their stuff? Is there, a confounding there sometimes? Where does that come from? How do we deal with that confounding of their stuff when this is our major source of connection?
Well, we can still connect from the heart, but we don't have to buy into the stories, right? I mean, I guess I'm thinking just even political differences right now. Like someone could have their political difference and we can still connect with them just on a caring level. Or even if it's something, someone's disrespectful in some way, right? Again, we can kind of set the boundary of, right, having some compassion for them and not allowing it, right? It's a difficult boundary, but realizing, right, it's coming from their own place of hurt. And it's never about us, right? At the same time, when we hurt others, right, that's coming from our own place. And then to kind of own that and to soothe that and to recognize the more we can stay regulated and not go into that fight, flight, freeze, the more we can kind of discern that and recognize it for what it is. And it's never easy.
Yeah, for sure.
Still working on that myself too.
Yeah, for sure. We have all those little negative nigglings in our own conscience that are often the words of those people from our past. And so when
And they
they
get
talk
triggered
those,
at those
yeah,
situations.
they
Yeah.
talk those words and it's like, wow, I was hearing this all along. Yeah. And so it's maybe harder to separate truth from our perception of our worth and safety. Yeah.
And I think that comes back to just that self-compassion for ourselves. So self-compassion even when we get triggered, self-compassion even when we're the one getting triggered, and self-compassion when we're feeling hurt, and just to feel it rather than reacting to it, right? To just like, oh, that hurts. And again, like, I didn't deserve that. That's not about me, but wow, that really does hurt. And offering ourselves just a moment of care, right?
I think at the dinner table, it might be easy to escape this kind of talk by literally continuing to eat and just not physically respond. It might be the minutes or hours after the eating's actually done, like while we're cleaning up or while everyone's sitting around, some type of a holiday arrangement where we don't have a way of not talking. When you think of boundary language, boundary setting, and that gentle introduction between family members, especially, or close friends, where we have to say something to put limits on where the conversation is going to go or where the behavior is going to go. Do you have any recommendations for like a template structure of how that could go? Like, how does that sentence start? How can we keep it brief?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know that it always has to be a conversation as much as just, it's almost more with ourselves. I mean, sometimes it needs to be a conversation, like, especially if we're trying to protect someone else, like a child, then I think then it does need to be a little clearer. But also I think just we have the right to get up and walk away too, right? I think that, and it speaks to, right? Or we don't have to react. We don't have to jump in. Sometimes it's just politely excusing yourself from the table, getting up, going to get some fresh air, just getting some space. And then, maybe or maybe not, you return to the conversation later, right? Or if it's a pattern, then you have the conversation later to prevent it from happening in the future, but not necessarily, in the middle of the dinner table or the kitchen or where everyone else is around, where it just can become a big, right? It can totally go the wrong way.
You can very quickly militarize your family or your friends.
Yeah, now you've created a big
Yes,
drama. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying, that boundaries are about us deciding about where we feel safe and worthwhile and keeping that space and that perception with us. And that sometimes we do need to step away. And you mentioned also that sometimes children are involved and then something has to be said directly, like in a safety issue, considering the amount of physical, emotional, and sexual violations against children. That's always a thing we should keep in mind. But yeah, I really appreciate this. I think this is such vital information for people moving into the celebratory season to really relish the time set apart to have those belonging, connecting conversations and experiences, and to say we need to do our private work to be prepared, especially if we come from a situation that has been hurtful and past painful experiences.
Yeah. And I think this time of year, just in general, right, as we move into the holidays, I think it takes a lot more. I think it's really important to have some kind of practice to do on a regular basis to just kind of keep ourselves, whether that's breathing or meditation or exercising mindfully or whatever it is. But yeah, I think, and saying no sometimes, so we don't have to do everything too that these holidays bring upon us. So
in that regard, do you have a favorite breath pattern or breath mnemonic that you like to lead patients in?
I primarily just try to have them, I usually have them start by just noticing their breath as it is. And then try anyone with anxiety. It's almost always up in the chest, right? Which is sending this constant signal that there's some kind of low level threat. So just dropping it down into the belly and just focusing on the breath in the belly and keeping it really simple. And I know a lot of yoga, they have numbers and counts, and I don't find that useful in the sense that for some people, especially with anxiety, their breath may be really shallow. And so to try to elongate the breath so much actually creates more tension, right? You're trying to you can feel it in your neck and your chest as you try to take in more than you're kind of ready for. So I think you have to start where you're at. And if that's 1 count in and 1 count out, then that's 1 count in and 1 count out, but to do it mindfully. And then to slowly allow the breath to expand as it's ready and willing to, right? So not to force anything, but just to kind of allow and be curious and creating a sense of safety from, directly sending a direct signal to the brain that we're okay.
Yeah, so that relaxing and expansive gravity endorsing breath that's going down into the body. We do have the most capacity in the lower lungs, right? The upper lungs are very small and the lower lobes are nice and full. So that makes sense physiologically. Well,
there's can I just say one other thing?
Absolutely.
This has been my favorite thing to do, just because so much, I think it's good around the holidays, but just, again, politically, there's just so much contention right now, which is going to show up in the holidays, I would expect, at dinner tables and whatnot. But HeartMath has a wonderful app, the Global Coherence app. And it's it's basically a compassion meditation where you're not only meditating for yourself, but you're meditating for the good of the world, or for all the natural disasters that have been happening. You can... some of them are very directed towards feeling like you have there's something to offer, even when we're feeling helpless or are out of control. It's just a way to kind of offer our own kindness, our own compassion to the world, which is, again, a sense of belonging, a really deep sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves, right? That we're all on this planet together.
I love that, because it's quite an evidence-based practice to offer compassion in response to stress so that we avoid burnout. A burnout can be avoided by those simple acts of compassion. And it's interesting when we set our intention to help, how the right ways to help show up. That we just become conscious. So I love that, taking our place shoulder to shoulder with all humanity in a conscious way, so that our part in it, our purpose, really shows up when we're ready. And then we can just say the yes. It's pretty simple at that point. So that's the HeartMath app.
Yeah, so there's the HeartMath app, but there's also, this is the Global Coherence, which is kind of brings people together. So it's also through HeartMath, so it's a little confusing. They have 2 separate apps.
Okay.
But this one, actually, you can join on, and so when I go on, there's usually 8 or 9 other people around the world that are all meditating for the same purpose. And so they even divide them up. So sometimes it's just global, for global well-being, but also, after the hurricanes, they were very specific to those areas that were suffering and war-torn areas. And so it can be very specific or very broad. But it just is a way of expanding our sense of belonging beyond just our immediate families, even certainly beyond ourselves.
That's really beautiful and totally unknown to me. So we'll put that in the show notes for our audience. And I want to mention, if anyone's interested in consulting with Dr. Jodie personally, she takes appointments through her website, mindfulpsych.com. And your book is so well received, published through North Atlantic, the book called Healing Depression Without Medication, A Psychiatrist's Guide to Balancing Mind, Body, and Soul. And I know as physician, you do not want to leave any of those elements out. You make sure that your patients eventually are fully orbed, fully healed human beings. You're not looking at diagnosis as a way of prescribing a medication. You're looking at diagnosis as a way of helping people move out of distress and into wellness. And I appreciate that so much about your practice. Thank you so much for being with us today. And remember, together we have everything we need.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Brain Health Hookup. I hope this episode radiates with the conviction that generating mental wellness needs to be fun and safe. We want you to find your power and understand your innate design to flourish in everything you do. And we hope that inspires you to come back and listen for more. I'd love for you to leave a review of this podcast as it helps this show grow to reach more people who need to make mental wellness fun. You can find a leave a review button, as well as all the YouTube visuals, bonuses, and ways we can help to support you on our website, podcast.grooveforhealth.com. I appreciate you more than words can say. See you next time, and remember, together we have everything we need.